Hey y'all, and welcome to Brawl. My name's Brian, and it's Ohio's Bernie Moreno absolutely knocks it out of the park with every single question that Kaitlan Collins dared throw his way. This is a fantastic answer to these questions. Let's dive in.
What would you say to the consumer who's watching that, who's worried that they're going to have to pay more for their car tonight?
Well, actually, March had a record car sales in the month of March. Sales are booming. I think there's a lot of inventory, probably 60, 90 days worth of inventory. So if somebody's really concerned, they can go buy a car today at dealer inventory and not have to worry about the tariff at all. But ultimately, what we're looking to do is very simple. We need cars made here in America that are sold here in America. It's extremely important that happens to rebuild our middle class, rebuild our industrial sector, rebuild cities like the ones I represent in Ohio. And of course, eventually you need customers. And if we keep gutting out our middle class, who are we going to sell these cars to? Henry Ford taught us that. Pay your workers well, and they can buy the very products that they make.
One question, if there is, inventory at these dealerships, because certainly they have been stocking up in anticipation of this, especially with the 1 month delay that President Trump gave them. What happens? How quickly can this turn around for production inside the United States? Because obviously a lot of the cars, even ones made here, have parts that come from other places.
Well, remember, the cars that are made final assembly in the U.S. and get parts from Mexico and Canada, those cars, if they're USMCA compliant, they don't get any tariffs, so they're completely tariff-free. So that's a big population of vehicles. The only ones that are mostly hurt are the cars that are made overseas exclusively and are shipped into the United States. The ultra luxury cars, I think the Democrats should rally around this tariff, because let's face it, if you're tariffing a guy who buys a Bugatti for $4 million, it's a tax on the very, very wealthy. You'd think Chuck Schumer should be applauding that, right?
What about a Mercedes dealership in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, though?
Yeah, well, Mercedes makes a lot of cars in Alabama, a huge chunk of them, actually exports some, by the way. And I think those cars will only have tariffs as much as the engines, transmissions, and electronics that come from Europe. If the other parts come from the U.S. or Mexico or Canada, there's no tariff.
We'll see what it looks. The former vice president disagrees. You were in the Rose Garden today with Vice President Vance, but Vice President Pence tweeted that the Trump tariff tax, he says, is the largest peacetime tax hike in the United States history. He says that they're nearly 10 times what they imposed during the first term, the Trump-Pence administration, as he noted. He says they're going to cost American families over $3,500 per year. If President Trump and Vice President Vance were hired by the American people to lower cost, what happens if their policies raise them?
Well, again, they were hired to make it so that your wages outstripped inflation. So if inflation is at 2%, and wages are up by 6%, they feel better about what they're doing. And look, no offense to Mike Pence, he's never run anything other than a political campaign. This is not a business guy. So he's repeating talking points.
He was the vice president.
Yeah, but he never ran a business. So he has no idea what any of this is about. He's never been in the private sector. These career politicians are part of the problem here in D.C. because they actually don't know what it's like to actually understand how businesses work. And what President Trump is doing is reversing the policies of people like Mike Pence, who sold this country out, that over decades gutted our industrial sector, shipped our jobs overseas. Cities like Cleveland, Columbus, Dayton, Toledo, Youngstown, these were thriving cities that produced a lot of goods. Look,
why do you hold Pence responsible for that, though?
Because he's just that group of politicians that were both Republicans and Democrats. It's not, again, him personally. It's just that group of politicians. A lot of the ones that I watched give speeches today on the Senate floor, they've been there for 20, 30 years while this country's been taken advantage of by foreign countries. Did nothing about it.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, right there is the biggest gripe that I believe everyone in the GOP should have against Mike Pence. Not about the cold day in January fiasco, not about that. But the fact is, the reason Mike Pence has become one of the most hated politicians in America is because he represents the Bush-era failures. And I'm not talking about just W here. I'm talking about Bush the Younger and Bush the Elder. Remember, Herbert Walker Bush said, "Read my lips, no new taxes." Well, what did he do? He cut a deal with the Democrats to raise taxes, and that was enough to get Bill Clinton elected in 1992. And then George W. Bush was able to give some tax cuts, and he helped the economy for a little while. But there's been a huge problem with the Bush doctrine, so to speak, and that is George W. Bush did absolutely nothing to strengthen the American economy. He just kind of pumped it up and then just let it slowly deflate. And he didn't deal with the looming problem that was caused by Bill Clinton, and there were two of them. Number one was essentially getting rid of, man, I really wish I pulled up the name, but there was a huge banking bill that got completely uprooted and destroyed, and it basically allowed for the 2008 financial crisis to happen. And George W. Bush did nothing to stop it. And then, just as big under Bill Clinton, was NAFTA. All right? Donald Trump has been screaming about NAFTA for the past 30 years, arguably as long as I have been alive. So, yeah, those are the main problems that we have refused to fix in the 90s. We had no political will to fix them in the 2000s, and they finally started rearing their ugly head after the Great Recession, and then Barack Obama came in and did absolutely nothing to fix the problem. And so we've had a two-front war. We've had an issue with NAFTA, and we've had an issue with banking. We sort of resolved the banking problem, but now we can't buy houses anymore. So we've resolved the issue, but we never fixed the underlying problems. And now you have more of our jobs shipped overseas, particularly to competing nations like Canada and Mexico, for instance. And here's just a basic estimation. A basic estimation of what's been going on with NAFTA. Between 1997 and 2020, the U.S. experienced an estimated 90,000 factory closures and the loss of 5 million manufacturing jobs, partly due to supply chain diversification that resulted from the North American Free Trade Agreement that came into effect on January 1st, 1994. By the way, the estimated loss of that? $19 trillion. That's half of our debt. Right there. Right there. Over 20 to 25 years, $19 trillion lost. That's jobs lost. That's families destroyed. That's people who were not able to come back into the workforce and make the money that they could. Those are American dreams destroyed. And guess what? We're trying something new here. Trying something that hasn't been done since before the Cold War. Now, this is where the things get really, really tricky with tariffs, and I think that Senator Moreno did a pretty good job of explaining all what's going on. He explained the reason why NAFTA has essentially destroyed the Rust Belt, and being a senator from Ohio, I think he has more of a handle on that. Strangely enough, however, this is the biggest problem with Mike Pence. Pence was the governor of Indiana. Indiana is considered part of the Rust Belt. Just ask someone from Indiana when's the last time they went to Gary. Okay? One of the worst cities in America. All because it got nuked by NAFTA. And instead of admitting that that's a problem and trying to deal with that and solve that problem and strengthen American jobs in his own state, Mike Pence instead rode the different kind of wave that came along with the Sun Belt, came with cheaper land, but it also came with the service economy. You can't run a nation on a service economy because eventually you run out of people to serve. This is the fundamental flaw with Democrat politics, and ultimately it's becoming the flaw of about a third of the Republican Party, who are still stuck in that post-Cold War ooey goodness that was the economy, the same kind of economy that we had right after World War II, but have refused to adapt it. We've refused to learn from our history, and right after the boom of the late 40s and the 50s came the bust of the 60s and the 70s. So after the boom of the 90s and the 2000s, guess what? We have been in this long malaise that's been made even worse by fraudulent policies from the Federal Reserve that has kept interest rates artificial and has made it even harder for Americans to acquire property and land, which is the second greatest way of getting into the middle class and staying there. You know what the first best way is? Having a steady, protected job that you know you're going to have for 30 years. The best ones of those are usually in either manufacturing or electrical or plumbing, because there's always going to be demand for that. And that's the problem. There's no demand for these manufacturing jobs. So Donald Trump is now trying with tariffs to make it more dollarable for America to have these manufacturing jobs. And we have a whole bunch of American men and women who aren't even looking for jobs anymore because they know they can get a better deal with food stamps. It is time to make American labor great again, and there's a growing movement of left-wingers, particularly Bernie Sanders burnouts, who realize that, in order to save the Democrat Party, they might want to invest heavier in American labor. This is something that neither the classic Republicans want to do because labor has often been the enemy of a good economy, and it's been the enemy of growth, but it's also been the friend of the middle class. So the politician that strikes that balance is going to be an incredibly successful one. So far, Donald Trump is trying his best through these tariff policies to make those middle-class style manufacturing jobs workable and dollarable again. Funny, that's almost a theme here of making things great again. But let me know if you think this is going to work down in the comments below. Senator Moreno understands this at a much deeper level than Mike Pence ever will. Kaitlan Collins, she's trying her best to keep up here, but she knows all she can do is just kind of sit there and take it and ask these softballs because Moreno keeps hitting them out of the park. Folks, my name is Brian. Hope you enjoyed that segment here on Politibrawl. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Catch you on the next one. Until then, y'all have a good one.